Welcome to Thoughts from the Floor, the series in which I sit on the floor and give you my thoughts because I'm still unpacking in my new apartment. Today I wanted to talk about remakes because I think that I have a bit of a weird relationship with remakes, and I suspect a bunch of you watching do as well. There's a whole lot of them that I really like and appreciate. Most recently, I really enjoyed Metal Gear Delta, and before that, I had a blast playing Shadow of the Colossus remake and Resident Evil 4 remake and Persona 3 Reload, and there's many, many more. Over time, though, I think my feelings around remakes have started to become a bit complicated, and it all came to a head around the last Nintendo Direct, which had an announcement that made me think, man, is this going too far? That announcement is, of course, Ocarina of Time. If you didn't watch the Nintendo Direct and somehow managed to avoid learning about it, surprise, there is a remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time happening. I recognize that the line of thinking that led me to the question of whether this is too far is overly dramatic. And since then, I've kind of reframed it as what are we gaining and what are we losing by doing these remakes? And the former of that, what are we gaining, is pretty simple. We get to indulge in nostalgia. It's cool to play classic old games with new graphics, and new people can also check those games out. What we're losing, though, is way more complicated, and it's a thing that I've been thinking about a lot because it's interesting. These days I've been thinking about that more and more, and specifically how important context is to a game and the legacy of that game. There's so many factors that make games a product of their time, from like the tastes of the audience and the limitations of technology to what is happening in game design in general at that time, and the innovations that are already there or that need to happen for that game to come to life. At any given time, the limitations imposed on making a game, the innovations made around the development of that game, and the advancements in how they're made are all equally important contributors to how that game is received and its legacy. The interesting thing about remakes is that they kind of strip those games of their context, and in a way, by doing that, they normalize, or at the very least, they mute the achievements of those games by making them look and feel and play like contemporary games. That means that unless you were there to experience the game when it originally came out, it can be difficult for people to discern what made that game enjoyable, or in the case of something like Ocarina of Time, what made that game so impactful. This is something that I first encountered and I've been thinking about for a long time when I was introducing the movie Akira to someone who hadn't seen it before. That movie's achievements and the ripple effect it had on art, animation, cinematography was monumental. It was released in 1988, which is the year after I was born, so I didn't watch it at release. I watched it when I was younger, a few years later. But at that time, even though I'd watched it a few years after its release, it still felt groundbreaking to me. It felt like a singular achievement that had this profound impact on shaping my interests and my tastes. But by the time I showed it to someone else, years and years later, every aspect of Akira had been picked apart and absorbed by pop culture as a whole, other mediums, other formats, and other works of art. Akira was so influential that what made it special is kind of ordinary now because of how far-reaching that influence was. And because the people experiencing it for the first time now, or back then when I was showing it to someone, are so divorced from the context it was created in and the context it created, that it just kind of feels unremarkable. Think of it this way. How many times have you seen the iconic bike slide from Akira? If you're anything like me, you've seen it a whole lot. It's everywhere. The first time I saw it when I was watching Akira, it was a moment that felt so formative that I can remember where I was and how I felt when I saw it. It's crystallized in my memory. Then each homage to it felt like a cool wink and a nod for a while. By this point, it feels like every other movie or TV show or comic thing has a bike slide moment in it. And you can draw a direct line from that scene in Akira where Tetsuo is escaping and he's using his psychokinesis, and the way that is depicted through animation and the storytelling around it, it kind of directly influenced my love of shonen anime like Dragon Ball Z or My Hero or Hunter x Hunter or even Full Metal Alchemist, any number of anime. That moment where he's like screaming and the energy he's emitting is deforming the building around him, and the building starts to crumble and come down, and he emerges through the dust and the debris, and his clothes are moving because of the wind his energy is generating around him, and the bandage has come off and is like a scarf now just whipping around him. That to me was the epitome of cool. In this day and age, if you show that to someone, they're probably gonna look at it and be like, yeah, I saw that in Kanye West's video for Stronger. That moment, and Akira as a whole, like I said, has been mined endlessly, and that mining has taken away all the context, so people don't really get why it's important if they're experiencing it for the first time. And that increasingly is how I've started to feel about some games, and it's my biggest worry for the Ocarina of Time remake. In this day and age, how much of what made Ocarina a groundbreaking game, a masterpiece, still feels that way or comes through in what people will likely play today? When people play that remake and lock onto an enemy, for example, will they understand that Ocarina was one of the games that popularized the targeting, and that locking on in video games wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for Ocarina and a few other games that created the context that led to that innovation? Probably not. Unless they already have that knowledge, they're more likely to not register it as important at all. And I don't expect Nintendo's going to be like, hold up guys, while you're doing this, just so you know, this shit was sick as hell back in the day because no one else is really doing it, and then we did it, and then we changed the game massively. Which means what made Ocarina of Time really and truly special is lost in time, and the game is kind of, by modern standards, if it's just remade and released as is, it's a game that is out of time and place. That's my biggest worry for that remake. We all know how devastating it is to show someone something that is super important to you and just have them kind of be like, yeah, all right. That's what it feels like that remake is being set up for. Of course, there are definitely ways to still make remakes enjoyable. Like I said, Demon's Souls was basically a one-to-one remake, but it had much nicer graphics, and I recommend that to everyone to this day. But I'd argue that what it does, while it was unique and profound, for me specifically, it still exists in a context now in a way that allows people to appreciate what it did when it came out back then. It's not that old. The other approach is what Konami and Bloober did with Silent Hill 2, which is take what was there and expand it to make it feel contemporary. And that game is incredible, but what made the original and what makes the remake so good and important is largely around the narrative and the ambience and the themes and its exploration of that themes, which I think people can appreciate irrespective of when they play it. I don't think the experience, that core, that influential part of it is different from the original to how it's perceived and understood today. It's even expanded to a degree. And then the Final Fantasy VII remakes are probably the most dramatic departure from what a game was to make it what it needs to be for a remake. But it kind of intentionally diverges from its own history by changing the story and the gameplay in a significant way. So you don't really even need that original context to enjoy it, because it's a thing of its own and it's creating its own context. This is a Final Fantasy VII for a new generation of people that those with history with Final Fantasy VII can still enjoy, but those without it can still appreciate it for what it is now. I think that's a really smart way to approach it, and love or hate those Final Fantasy VII remakes, I think that was the only way you could approach a game like that that has such wide-reaching influence. Very few games hold up as is, and I think that's especially the case for games as important as Ocarina of Time. It's one of those games that's really hard to expand and explore in different and new ways because it's so beloved that I think a lot of people are going to have a negative reaction to that. Do you really want Nintendo to change what Ocarina is? And if they don't, will people really understand what it was what it meant to gaming as a whole, or will it just be an ordinary game that feels like someone repainted over a masterwork? It's a tricky proposition. If it was up to me, I think I would be coming at it with the whole mindset as similar to Final Fantasy VII remakes, where I would want to diverge where necessary and make a game that is an original but familiar take on Ocarina of Time that's designed to be Ocarina for a new generation of people. Maybe indulge in the weird timeline stuff that Zelda has going on for it, and see if you can find it a way to make it important for the people playing games today in the same way or close to how it was back then. At the very least, it's not a bad reflection or a empty reflection. It can have a chance at standing out for being something of its own. So I think that's a big challenge for Nintendo to overcome, and honestly I'm quite interested and excited to see how they approach it, but at the same time I'm kind of worried about how people think of that remake and what it does to how people perceive Ocarina of Time as a whole throughout time, you know? It kind of has interesting implications for game preservation as well. Like, you need that original version to continue to exist going forward and make it accessible, because if you don't, and only the modern remakes of it exists, without that context, people years in the future might not really get why Ocarina of Time was a big deal. There will be some like disconnect between what they're reading in the textbooks that say explain how modern game design evolved and Ocarina's place in there, and what they see Ocarina of Time being, because they're playing a new remade version of that game that is, you know, within the framework of a bunch of games that do similar things. I don't know. It's kind of rambling at this point, but I hope you get what I mean. Anyways, thank you again for watching this video. I said I would be set up by this time. I very much am not. I encountered a bunch of problems with setting up my setup, primarily around my gaming PC, which decided to just absolutely crap its pants for no reason whatsoever. I think I fixed it, and I only kind of turned it off and on again. I took the GPU out and reseated it, and it seems like it's working okay, but it's one of those things where it's like, I live in fear now. I don't know if I fixed it or if I just delayed an inevitable death, so that slowed everything down. But hopefully next week, by the time you see me next, I'll be settled. Thank you for watching again. If you haven't already, please do subscribe and share and like and all that kind of business to spread the word. And yeah, and I will see you next time. And hopefully the streams will be coming back soon as well. Fingers crossed. Peace.